Computer share. All right. So one of the things of this group is that every once in a while I'll send out a message to see, okay, what do you guys want to learn? So we got some feedback back about losing your virginity as becoming a podcast guest. So that's what this presentation is going to cover. It is going to be a little bit humorous at times, but again, the goal of this is to kind of break down the fear factor and move forward and become a podcast guest. So we're going to dive into this. So the first thing that we're going to cover in this is a quick checklist, like quick tips. And again, they will probably be humorous, right? So if you're just thinking about podcasting and comparing it to like virginity, right? Look at a couple of these words on here, and I'm just gonna maybe call it like maybe two or three of them, not all of them, because of time constraints. But number 19 is a really good one, right? You can get pregnant your first time, and if it feels right, then you might want to join forces and have a brand baby. So if you know anything about branding, and you've heard me talk about branding before, again, podcasting is a gateway to creating these brand babies, and a brand baby is essentially an association with someone else, and you guys have some great synergy, and you collaborate, and then you come up with a new brand or a new product or a new service. And as you read each one of these, and again, you'll have access to this document. I'll put a link in the chat box to kind of just see these quick tips, things that you should know. Moving into the more meat and potatoes of this presentation is going to be the question, right? I have never been a guest, so I don't know the first thing about it. Like, how do you even know if a podcast is good for you? So the first thing that you want to do is you want to essentially check out the topic. Like, if you're looking for a podcast and you type in a keyword and podcast, see what comes up. After that comes up, then the next step to that is kind of make sure that you can deliver value on that topic. And a good example would be, okay, if you're an accountant and you're going on to a business podcast, or if you're going on to a CPA podcast or a tax podcast, obviously being a bookkeeper, you have a lot of value to add, so then you can give value to that particular podcast. Step 3 would be make sure that they have listeners. And this is when you're going to get into the technical aspects of podcasting and a little bit more behind the scenes. But they're easy. They're not really difficult. One platform is called Listen Notes. And so if you look at my screen, everyone at this point in time is probably familiar with Joe Rogan's podcast. And I just want to kind of show you these numbers. And again, these numbers are not to intimidate. These numbers are just to kind of understand like the range of podcasting, to realize that someone is actually listening to that podcast. So Joe Rogan is essentially the best of the best. His LS score is essentially saying that out of 100 listeners, 97 of them are listening to pretty much his entire podcast. He is in the top 0.01%. Okay, that's like the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. He probably gets 1 million downloads per episode. So if you're a new guest, you probably don't want to go after Joe Rogan right away. You kind of want to kind of warm up into it. But you want to make sure that that podcast has at least listeners. So there's other episodes and podcasts on here. Boston Cage, we're at the top 0.5%. Some of you are familiar with Fying is a four-letter word. She's in the top 10%. Donnie is in the top 10%. So again, there's top 50%, there's top 100%. But if you're in the top 10%, that's kind of the podcast that you want to be on. That means that these podcasts are having listeners every single time they drop a podcast, that they're active podcasters, meaning that they're at least at the bare minimum dropping a podcast per week, sometimes even 2 podcasts per week. So the goal is, if you're going to Listen Notes and you find that podcast through your Google search, then you want to put it in Listen Notes and see if they're ranked. Right? Again, if they're ranking, that means they're doing some due diligence and they're working in their podcast pretty regularly. Then you'll have some podcasts that will show up like this one on the bottom right. That's red. They're not ranked. That means that they're not in the top anything percent. That means that they've created a podcast and they probably didn't do any marketing, haven't done anything with it. This particular podcast, I think they have 2 episodes, and that's the only 2 episodes they ever posted. So this is not a podcast that you're going to want to be on for obvious reasons. Scrolling down to Charitable. So Charitable is another platform that's really, really robust, and it tells you a lot of analytical data behind the scenes. And when you're talking about podcasting, it's like Amazon Books. Did the book rank? Is it a top seller? Same thing for podcasts. So if you're looking at it, you want to make sure that that podcast is at least ranked in multiple, if not one category. Is it ranked national? Is it ranked globally? And then look at the ranking numbers. You know, the lower the number, the more higher they are ranked. I mean, top 10 is almost impossible unless you're Joe Rogan. And you can kind of look at the Boston Cage stats. We're ranked in probably 7 to 8 different categories, US and global. So again, Being ranked is something that you have to work at. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And looking at these other two podcasts, and I picked these two podcasts in particular because you may look at them and say, well, the one on the left is only ranked in one category, and it's number 89. Well, just like books, you want to think about it from the standpoint of, okay, is this book really a book in a really dominant category? And if you look at the category, it's Apple Podcasts, it's a country, and it's film reviews. It's probably not a lot of competition in that particular category, hence why it's ranked so high. But then this other podcast on the right hand side, not only are they not ranked, but they do have reviews. So the being that they have 5-star reviews, I would say this is probably a better podcast than this one. In addition to it, they have a better definition and description versus this one is just blah. So don't discredit ranking. Okay, if they're not ranked, it does not mean that you should not be on that show, but you want to do a little bit more due diligence. See if they have a description, see if they have any reviews, and then make an educated choice based upon that factor. Scrolling down to Apple. Apple is essentially like the top dog when it comes to podcasting as far as more so the reviews. So you have your ranking, you have like your global ranking, but then are you getting any reviews or 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts? So if you're looking at this, you want to make sure that at the bare minimum they have a few dozen 5-star reviews or at least a dozen 5-star reviews, and then you want to kind of review the review, see what people are saying about the show to make sure that the show is something that you want to be a part of. And then you want to make sure that, there's multiple different like written reviews. It's not just one or two, maybe 3 or 4, 5 or 6, and make sure that you feel good about, okay, this is something that I could talk to my friends about because other people are also reviewing this podcast as well. And collectively, the number you're looking for as far as total 5-point reviews, I would say somewhere between 10 or more. And that's a good place to be in. And, right now I think we're at like 400 and something reviews. But keep in mind, like, there's always something else to strive for. If I was to compare myself to Joe Rogan has like 10,000 reviews. So 400 is okay, but 10,000 would be better. So there's always another level when it comes down to reviews and ranking. Going into the next question, do most podcasts stick with the script? And the best way to answer that is to then do your research again. I mean, you're going to have to like listen to a couple episodes. The worst thing you can do to become a guest is go on a show cold turkey and have no reference point to what that person talks about or what they are about on that particular show or what questions do they usually or may ask. And again, you could always ask that podcaster for a list of questions before you're on the show, but generally doing your due diligence and listening to maybe 2 or 3 episodes would fulfill that requirement before having to ask for it. And it'll also give you a better tonality of that particular host. Another question is, are the specific points we should be sharing about our business and audience? And again, this answer is 100% yes. And this is a strategy that you must, all the rules can be broken except for this one. This is the one rule that you should not break. If you're going to be a guest on a particular podcast, you're going to be marketing you and your service and your product. So first and foremost, you want to tell your story. And you want to tell your story and have it designed in chronological order. From like not the time when you were born, but it could be a factor to who you are, then you would talk about that. But then you want to also be able to break down this story into segmentations, 30 seconds at a time, 60 seconds at a time, 3 minutes at a time. The last thing you want to do is talk for 10 minutes on one particular question. You're not going to leave room for that podcaster to then interview you and really tell your story the way that they want to tell your story. You also want to insert your hurdles that you've overcame. You also want to insert your achievements. You want to insert your product. You want to insert your services. Point blank, period. Again, this is one of the rules you cannot break. If you're going to be on a show, you have to make sure that you do these things so that way you get the most value out of that person's audience. And then last but not least with that, you want to look for, while you're telling your story, you want to make sure your story has like a wow factor. And everyone that's on this call has a wow factor. Everyone's story is unique. So you're looking for the raised eyebrows, the big eyes, because that's when you start to become sexy to that podcaster. And then that podcaster will then refer you to other podcasters because your story is uniquely yours. But if you tell it in a fashion that makes them believe and be like, oh my God, I'm motivated by you, then obviously that could then become a trickling effect for other people and other interviews down the road. And last but not least is the bonus. I would say Matchmaker is probably one of the better platforms right now. They have about 40,000 podcasts. So if you're looking to get on a podcast and everything that I've showed you up until this point, and you just want to review content to figure out which podcast you want to be on, then Matchmaker.fm is the platform for you. This is just a screenshot of what it looks like. Again, you can be a guest or you can be a host, and then you'll get emails coming in because they're going to do marketing for you. They're going to promote your show, and they're also going to promote you to other podcasters as well. So like every single day, I probably get maybe about 3 to 4 emails from this platform saying, "Hey, these are some new people that should be on your show," or "Here's some new shows that you should be on." And the environment is pretty straightforward. You just type in a keyword, or you can organize the search by business, USA, English, or any other topic or any other country that you would like, and then you would be able to click on that show and then submit to them to say, "Hey, I would love to be on your show, and here's why." And going into closing, and any questions, and obviously, I always do this at the end. If you want to leave a review, if this education spot was helpful, by all means take a screenshot of this and leave a review, because that information is going to help me to create better and more effective content. Any questions?
Thank you, Essay, as always. That was amazing.
Who's been on a podcast, like a guest, just out of curiosity? Oh, looks like we have a lot of.
Oh, there's some virgins in the room.
I would, and then I'm gonna just piggyback on that. And first of all, my friend Phil is here. Phil, and put your camera on. We can see your face. There he is.
Hey. Hi, hello, welcome.
Thank you. I'm stoked to be here. I'm very excited. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, and everybody for inviting me and having me on. So
we're glad you're here.
Yeah, great.
My add-on is when you are on a podcast, you can add it on your LinkedIn profile under, I add them under publications. So and then you can add the host as like the co-author. So then like, if you look at my profile, I was on the essay. Well, essays, my episode hasn't dropped yet, but when it does, I'll add that episode, and then he will be on there too with a direct link to the show. So people can see what podcast you've been on.
Oh, that's awesome.
What a great idea.
Fun.
So I have a question. So like every time you sign up for to be a guest on a podcast, you usually get a set of questions, correct?
That's not correct.
Or no?
Not necessarily. No.
Okay.
Not everyone has that system in place. Like my podcast, I have it systematized to where by the time you get to the second part of my funnel, you'll get all the questions automatically. But a lot of times, most people don't have that. You just have to ask them, or reach out, or follow up with an email, or again, listen to an episode to get that information without having to ask for it.
And Kim, I think that part of that is preference. Like I feel like I am a better guest on shows when I don't know the questions. I don't want to rehearse anything. That's how my style comes out better, when I'm talking straight from the hip. And I like that honest communication between me and the host. Mm-hmm. Now, it depends on the host. It has to be a good host to keep that flow and that connection going. But some people do prefer questions ahead of time.
Yep. And even still, even if I give questions, I'm never going to ask the questions the same on any episode. So I always base my questions based upon what your response was before, or something that you said 20 minutes ago, and I'll bring that back up. So that way the synergy of your story continues to keep building upon itself. And that's what you want to look for as far as host that could be creative in that nature, not strictly asking questions by a book.
Okay.
Cool. Any last questions?
We good?
Perfect.
Awesome. We'll be